God knows that you are tired. These words echo through the corridors of our inner turmoil, whispered by the deep recesses of our hearts, if only we had the ears to hear them. Life, in all its complexity, wears us thin. We who have been chasing after fleeting goals, hoping for fulfillment, suddenly find ourselves weary. Weary in body, weary in soul, weary in mind. Perhaps we thought that we could manage it all, the deadlines, the expectations, the disappointments, the victories and the failures. But somewhere along the way, we became tired. We all know this feeling, the fatigue that accompanies not just the physical exertion, but the exhaustion of hope itself. When we are tired in this way, we do not need to be reminded of our condition. It is as if the very weight of the world rests upon our shoulders. We look around, we see others carrying their burdens, perhaps even carrying them with a greater grace, and we wonder, how did we become so tired? How did we lose the energy to carry on, even when we know we must? But here is the profound mystery. God knows that you are tired. The knowledge of God is not just an intellectual knowledge, the kind that perceives facts from afar. No, this is a deeply relational knowing. God knows that you are tired because He has seen your weariness, understood it, and in a way experienced it in a manner that only a loving Creator could. The tiredness we feel is not unknown to Him. He understands it intimately, perhaps more intimately than we could ever imagine. The Lord of the universe, the Creator of all that is, the one who holds all things together, knows the fatigue that arises when life presses in on every side. He knows the frustration that comes when our dreams seem too distant, when our hopes become submerged beneath the weight of circumstance. He knows the sting of disappointment, the agony of feeling as though we've given everything and still come up short. And He knows how our hearts long for rest, for respite, for solace from the constant struggle. In the grand scope of history and the great cosmic drama that unfolds beyond our understanding, it might seem as though our individual struggles are insignificant. Yet God's love does not measure the weight of your tiredness against the backdrop of the world's suffering. No, He meets you where you are. God sees you not just as a part of a greater story, but as a beloved individual whose exhaustion He comprehends. This knowledge does not come from a distant God, separated from our lives, but from the God who became flesh, who walked among us, who experienced the very things that we experience. When Christ walked upon this earth, He did not remain untouched by the human condition. He grew weary. He became tired. He knew what it was to face the demands of others, to be drained by the expectations placed upon Him. And in this He reveals a powerful truth, that tiredness itself does not disqualify us from being loved by God, but rather it is a place where God meets us. There is a passage that we find in the Gospels where Christ speaks these words, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." These words are not merely a call to action, they are an invitation to solace, a gentle beckoning to rest from the exhaustion of trying to carry the weight of the world on our own. In a world where everything tells us to press on, to push forward, to always be striving, this call seems almost countercultural, but it is in this invitation that we see the very nature of God. He does not call us to endless work or unattainable perfection. He calls us to rest, to lay down the heavy burdens we carry and find rest in His presence. But how often we resist this rest. How often we believe that our worth is bound up in our productivity, in our ability to keep going, even when we are at our breaking point. In this, we forget that God's knowledge of our fatigue is not simply a recognition of weakness. It is an understanding of our humanity. We were never meant to carry the weight of the world alone. We were never meant to be invincible. Yet in our pursuit of what we think is strength, we find ourselves worn out, empty, and struggling. God, in His infinite wisdom, does not shame us for our weariness. He does not scold us for being tired. Rather, He invites us to rest, to find renewal not through our own efforts, but through His grace. In this, He shows us a better way. He does not say, "You must carry on until you break." No, He invites us to surrender our burdens, to lay them down at His feet, and trust that He will carry them for us. The God who knows we are tired does not look at our fatigue with judgment, but with compassion. And in this compassion, He offers not just rest, but also a renewal of spirit. This renewal, however, does not always come in the form we expect. It is not a promise of immediate relief from all our troubles. Rather, it is a promise of presence, a promise that God will be with us in our exhaustion, that He will walk with us through the valley of weariness. He does not offer an escape from the trials of life, but a companion who understands, who bears the weight with us. In the quiet moments of our tiredness, we often feel the temptation to isolate ourselves. We think that our struggles are too small to matter in the grand scheme of things. We think that we should be able to handle it on our own. But God knows better. He knows that when we are tired, we need community. We need others to walk alongside us, to share in our burdens, to offer a hand when we can no longer walk on our own. And He provides this community through the body of Christ, through fellow believers, through those who know and understand that we are all in this journey together. God knows that we are tired, but He also knows that in our tiredness there is an opportunity for growth. We are perhaps most open to the quiet whisper of God when we are worn out, when we have exhausted our own strength and are forced to look beyond ourselves for help. It is in these moments that we are reminded that our strength is not our own. Our strength comes from Him. There is a beauty in surrendering our exhaustion to God. There is a peace that comes when we admit that we cannot carry it all, when we cease trying to control every aspect of our lives. When we stop pretending that we have it all together, we make room for God to work in us. It is in our weakness that His strength is made perfect. It is in our tiredness that His power is revealed. God knows that you are tired, but He also knows what you need. And what you need is not necessarily rest in the way the world defines it, but a deeper kind of rest. A rest that goes beyond physical rejuvenation, a rest that nourishes the soul. It is a rest that comes from knowing that God is with you, that He is walking with you through every step of the journey, that you are never alone, even when you feel most alone. When we are tired, we often become disillusioned. We lose sight of our purpose, of the things that once brought us joy. We begin to wonder if it is all worth it. But in those moments, we are invited to rest in God's truth. He knows that we are tired, and He knows that there is more to our story than this moment of exhaustion. There is a greater hope that awaits us, a hope that is not bound by the weariness of the present, but by the eternal love of a God who walks with us. As we come before God in our weariness, let us remember that we are not alone. He knows us, He understands us, and He offers us the rest we so desperately need. And when we find that rest, we will find that the journey, though long and difficult, is not without its purpose. The tiredness we feel is not the end of the story, but a chapter in the narrative of grace that God is writing in our lives. In moments of fatigue, when our hearts feel too heavy to lift and our spirits sink beneath the weight of responsibilities and cares, We may ask, why must this weariness be so persistent? Why does it not end? It is in such moments that God's deep understanding of our human condition speaks to us. We may find ourselves asking questions of purpose, questioning whether all of the effort is worth it, whether the grind of life will ever stop. Yet even in this, God's knowledge of our tiredness shines through, not as a harsh reminder of our insufficiency, but as a compassionate invitation to rest in Him, to take shelter in His presence. God does not promise that we will be free from difficulty or exhaustion. The weary seasons of life are not swept away with a simple prayer or a quick fix. The brokenness of the world, the burdens of our daily lives, and the responsibilities we carry do not dissipate with the waving of a magical wand. Instead, God promises something much greater. He promises that He is with us in our tiredness. Christ came to walk alongside us, not just in the moments of our greatest triumphs, but also in our deepest struggles. He entered into the exhaustion of human life fully. He knew the pain of being misunderstood, the sorrow of loss, the frustration of being perpetually pulled in every direction, the anger of injustice, and the feeling of being abandoned. In His incarnation, God experienced the fullness of human fatigue, not only physical exhaustion, but the weariness that comes with a heart that is burdened by the weight of the world. And yet, in all of this, Christ did not retreat from His mission. He did not withdraw from the suffering, nor did He complain that the journey was too great. He bore the cross, not because He was immune to weariness, but because He understood the depth of it and the redemptive power that can be found in our weariness. Christ's very suffering becomes a wellspring of strength for us, for it is in that suffering that we discover that God understands. He has been there. Thus, when we are weary, we are not left with a God who stands apart from us, untouched by our struggles. Instead, we encounter a God who comes close, who feels with us, who weeps with us, and who strengthens us. In His presence, we find the comfort of knowing that the Lord Himself bore the deepest tiredness for us. He does not ask us to carry the weight alone, nor does He turn away from us in our fatigue. He extends His hand, inviting us to cast our burdens upon Him, to lean on His strength, and to rest in His arms. This divine invitation to rest does not always come with immediate solutions. When we are tired, we want the problems to disappear, the obstacles to be removed, and the burdens to be lifted. But God's rest is not always the immediate alleviation of our struggles. Rather, it is a rest that sustains us through them. God's rest empowers us not by removing the weight of our responsibilities, but by giving us the strength to carry them in a new way, with Him by our side. There is something truly transformative about surrendering our tiredness to God. When we acknowledge our limits, when we admit that we cannot do it all, we open ourselves to receive His grace. It is a grace that does not condemn us for our weakness, but a grace that lifts us up. This grace is not simply the absence of struggle, but the presence of God in the midst of it. It is a grace that enables us to keep going, not on our own strength, but on His. This is the paradox of the Christian life. When we are at our weakest, we are often the closest to experiencing God's strength. In our exhaustion, we are reminded that we are not self-sufficient. We were never meant to be. We are creatures made for communion with one another and with God. In our isolation, we become worn out, but in our fellowship with God and others, we find the strength to continue. In our tiredness, we discover a deep dependence on God. It is easy, in times of abundance or success, to believe that we are self-reliant, that we have all we need within ourselves. But when we are weary, we realize how little we can do on our own. We are reminded that we are not invincible. The human spirit, however strong it may seem at times, is finite. But in God we find an infinite strength that never runs dry. He does not grow weary, He does not tire, and He does not abandon us when we are at our lowest. His strength is made perfect in our weakness. When we encounter our weariness, we are confronted with a choice. We can either continue to strive in our own power, or we can trust in God's power to sustain us. This choice is a choice of faith. Faith is not merely an intellectual assent to theological truths. It is the willingness to trust God in the midst of our fatigue. It is the decision to let go of the desire to control everything and to embrace the vulnerability of relying on God. This does not mean that our tiredness will instantly disappear, nor does it mean that the challenges we face will evaporate overnight. But it does mean that we are not alone in our struggle. God's presence with us transforms our experience of weariness. When we walk with Him, we are reminded that the journey is not about the destination, but about the relationship. The destination will come in due time, but for now, God is concerned with walking with us every step of the way, carrying us when we cannot walk, and lifting us when we are too tired to rise. In this way, God's understanding of our tiredness is not just a passive acknowledgement of our condition, it is a dynamic force that transforms our hearts. When we realize that God knows our tiredness, we begin to see our exhaustion through a different lens. It is no longer a sign of failure, but an opportunity for God to reveal His grace in our lives. Our tiredness becomes the very place where God's love is poured out, where His strength is made manifest. As we move forward in life, it is essential that we recognize the value of rest. Not just physical rest, but spiritual rest, emotional rest, and relational rest. These are not indulgences or signs of weakness. They are integral to the health of our hearts and minds. We are not created to be machines, endlessly grinding without respite. We are created in God's image, and He Himself rested. In His rest, He found joy, He found renewal, and He found pleasure in His creation. We too must learn to rest in God's presence, to rest in His love, and to rest in the knowledge that He is enough. In this rest, we find the strength to rise again, not in our own might, but in the power of the One who knows our tiredness and who loves us with an everlasting love. The rest that God offers us is not a mere pause from activity. It is a deep, soul-satisfying peace that transcends circumstances. It is a peace that allows us to move forward, not in our own strength, but in the strength of God. Let us remember then that when we are tired, we are not abandoned. We are seen, we are understood, and we are invited into the rest that only God can provide. The weariness we experience often comes when the demands of life seem to stack upon us, one after another. The weight of responsibility, the obligations, the expectations, they all converge, and suddenly we find ourselves standing in the midst of it, unable to keep up, unable to even breathe. In those moments, it is easy to feel as if we are alone in our struggle. It is easy to convince ourselves that no one understands, that no one knows the depth of our tiredness. We may feel abandoned, isolated in our exhaustion, convinced that this is just something we have to push through on our own. But God, in His infinite compassion, refuses to leave us in this state. He does not leave us alone with our tiredness. Instead, He calls us to Himself. He invites us into His rest. a rest that is not merely a temporary escape from the demands of life, but a lasting peace that sustains us through all things. When Christ spoke of rest, he was not offering a break from life's struggles, but an invitation to enter into a different kind of rhythm, one that is founded not on our strength, but on his grace. This rest is found not in retreat from our responsibilities, but in surrendering our burdens to the one who already carries them. God does not promise to take away our struggles, but he promises to be with us through them. His rest is not about escape. It is about finding peace in the midst of the storm, finding stillness in the chaos, and finding the strength to continue when we feel that we have nothing left to give. There is a deep and abiding peace that comes from knowing that God sees us in our tiredness. This peace does not erase our fatigue, but it gives us a new perspective on it. We are no longer burdened by the weight of the world alone. The God who created the heavens and the earth, the God who set the stars in place and breathed life into creation, is the same God who walks with us in our weariness. He knows exactly how we feel. He is not distant from our struggles, but intimately involved in them. And in this knowledge we are reminded that we are not alone. We do not have to carry our burdens by ourselves. The invitation is there. Come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest. The rest that God offers is not merely a momentary respite, but an enduring peace that comes from a deep and abiding relationship with him. It is the peace that passes all understanding, the peace that guards our hearts and minds even when the world around us is crumbling. It is important to note that this rest does not imply the absence of struggle. The Christian life is not one of constant ease and comfort. It is a life marked by trials and tribulations, by challenges and difficulties. We are not promised a life free from pain or hardship, but what we are promised is that, in the midst of it all, God will be with us. His presence will provide the strength we need to keep going. And this is where the true rest lies, in the assurance that we are never truly alone. We may feel tired, we may feel overwhelmed, but God is with us every step of the way. He is not a distant observer, watching from afar as we struggle. He is beside us, walking through the pain, sharing in our burdens, and offering his strength when we feel we have none left. He knows that we are tired, and he knows exactly what we need. There is something profoundly humbling about acknowledging our weariness before God. It is in these moments of vulnerability that we find our greatest strength. When we come to God in our tiredness, we are not showing weakness. We are demonstrating a kind of strength that comes from humility. We are saying, I cannot do this on my own, but I trust you to carry me through. And it is in this trust that God meets us. He does not condemn us for our tiredness. He does not criticize us for being weary. Instead, he embraces us in our exhaustion, offering us his rest. This rest, however, is not a passive thing. It is not simply a retreat from the world, but an active participation in God's work in our lives. When we come to God for rest, we are not simply seeking a break from our duties, but a renewal of our strength to carry on. God's rest is not a call to inaction. It is a call to a deeper dependence on him. It is a rest that empowers us to face each new day, to carry the burdens of life with grace, and to live out our calling with renewed energy and joy. We often forget that God is not just concerned with our physical well-being. He is concerned with the condition of our hearts and souls. Our weariness is not just a result of physical exhaustion. It is often a reflection of the deeper exhaustion of the soul. The weariness that comes when we are disconnected from our true source of strength. The weariness that arises when we try to go it alone. But in His love and mercy, God offers us the rest that we need, the rest that comes from abiding in Him. This is why the psalmist can say, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." This is not a passive rest, but an active, restorative rest. God, as our shepherd, leads us beside still waters. He guides us to the places where our souls can be renewed. He does not leave us in the wilderness, wandering aimlessly. He leads us to a place of peace, a place of rest, a place where our hearts and minds can be restored. In the moments when we are tired, when we feel that we cannot take another step, God is leading us to that place of stillness. He is inviting us to lay down our burdens, to rest in His presence, and to trust that He will provide everything we need. This rest is not a resignation, but a surrender of our need for control, a surrender of our desire to manage everything on our own, and a surrender of our own strength. When we rest in God, we are saying, "I trust You, not just with my burdens, but with my life." God's invitation to rest is a call to return to the place where our souls were first created to dwell, in His presence. It is in this presence that we find true rest, the rest that transcends the weariness of the world and brings a peace that only God can give. This peace does not come from the absence of struggle, but from the presence of God in the midst of it. As we reflect on God's promise of rest, we are reminded that it is not just an individual experience, but a communal one. We are called to bear one another's burdens, to share in each other's weariness, and to walk alongside one another in love and compassion. We are not meant to carry our tiredness alone. God has placed us in community, in the body of Christ, where we can find strength in one another. Together we are able to encourage, uplift, and support each other, reminding one another that we are not alone in our weariness. In this communal rest, we discover a deeper understanding of what it means to be the church, a body of believers that is united in our dependence on God and our love for one another. We find strength not only in our own personal relationship with God, but in our relationships with others who share in our journey. So when you are tired, remember this: God knows. He knows your weariness, your struggles, and your burdens, and He offers you rest. Not just rest for your body, but rest for your soul. He invites you to come to Him, to lay down your burdens, and to trust that He will give you the strength you need to continue. And as you rest in His presence, you will find that His strength will become your strength, His peace will become your peace, and His grace will sustain you through every trial and every weariness. And in this rest, you will find that you are not only renewed, but transformed by the love of God that meets you in your tiredness and lifts you up to new heights. The God who knows that you are tired is also the God who gives you the strength to keep going. Trust Him, rest in Him, and know that in His presence you will find the peace that your heart longs for.